Salve, discipuli. Today we learn a little bit about Seneca. Here you see a bust of Seneca. You've seen this before. And of course in class today you began reading some of Seneca's writing on what to do when you're angry. You know, I'm angry a lot, so I find this stuff interesting. There you have Seneca, plain enough looking gentleman. His full name is Lucius Annaeus Seneca the Younger. There's another famous Seneca. He's referred to as Seneca the Elder, and that is his father. But the Seneca we're reading is Seneca the Younger. Okay? He was born in about 4 BC, died in AD 65. As is the case with a lot of these guys, you know, the birth date is somewhat suspect, but we're always pretty darn sure about when they died. He was actually born in Spain. But because of his talent and the wealth of his family, he was ultimately educated in Rome. So once again, we see a talented individual born outside of Rome, but making his way to Rome because that's the place to go if you're talented and you have the wealth. He was a student of philosophy and rhetoric. He was an amazing public speaker. Obviously not as good as our hero Cicero, but he was amazing all the same. He wrote quite a bit on philosophy as well. So this is another example of a guy, again, not unlike Cicero. He's a great public speaker, a philosopher, a politician, all of that wrapped up in one guy. He served as quaestor. So here you see him involved in politics. Initially, he got this post partly because of family connections, but once he was there, he did a good job. And of course, once you're quaestor, you're admitted into the Senate. And it was in the Senate that he got the attention of the emperors. In particular, when he spoke in the Senate, since he was such a good public speaker and such an impressive intellect, he ended up arousing the jealousy of Caligula. Remember, Caligula is our Emperor Gaius. Remember, Caligula, of course, was a little bit batty, a little bit crazy. And we don't blame him too much because of his upbringing. Let's not forget that his mother and siblings were exiled and then killed by Tiberius, who essentially raised Caligula. So we understand. At any rate, supposedly Caligula got really jealous of Seneca in the Senate, and in theory, they say that he only let Seneca live because Seneca was in such ill health that Caligula assumed Seneca would just die anyway. And that's the only reason he didn't exact revenge and kill him sooner. And of course, we know Seneca ultimately is going to outlive Caligula. Ultimately, Seneca was banished to Corsica by Claudius. Corsica being an island off of Italy. Claudius banished Seneca either because of some sort of intrigue where he thought that Seneca was involved in some sort of conspiracy, or possibly because Seneca was in a relationship, you know what I'm talking about, with I think it was the sister of Gaius or somebody like that, with somebody in the imperial family. So for one reason or the other, Claudius, of course, who was the emperor after Gaius Caligula, banished Seneca to Corsica. Ultimately, not long after banishment, Seneca is recalled by Agrippina, the mother of Nero, and then Agrippina charges Seneca with being Nero's tutor. So you have a young Nero being taught by Seneca, the great philosopher, the great public speaker, okay, all because Agrippina, the mother, wanted it so. When Nero comes into power, Seneca becomes good personal friends and a good ally with a guy named Burrus. Burrus was the Praetorian prefect at the time. His name in and of itself is not that important. What is important is that you remember there's this Praetorian prefect along with Seneca who acted as the advisors of Nero in running the empire from about 54 to 62. And it is in these years that Nero's reign was sane and under control and effective. Seneca even went so far in his support of Nero that he wrote a defense of Nero after Nero had his mother killed. Remember that the assassination of Nero's mother was not really a secret. After Nero failed to do it secretly, he just sort of went all out and had a guy clubbered to death, and everybody knew what happened. But Seneca wrote a defense of Nero for that assassination. When Burrus dies, Nero ends up retiring. So when Burrus, one of the advisors, dies, I said it again. When Burrus dies, Seneca ends up retiring. And part of the reason he retired is because this rather vicious individual called Tigellinus takes over the Praetorian Guard instead of Burrus. Seneca did not get along with this Tigellinus, so he ends up retiring. And so he is no longer advising Nero. Burrus is no longer advising Nero. Things start to go bad. In the end, Seneca was forced to commit suicide when Nero accused him of a conspiracy. This was a famous conspiracy called the Piso conspiracy. You don't need to know that, but it was this famous conspiracy that Nero thwarted, and he suspected that Seneca was involved in it. We just don't know if he was or not, but the bottom line is when Nero said, "Hey Seneca, you need to kill yourself," Seneca said, "Okay, I will do my duty and kill myself." So that's the basic story of Seneca. Seneca, in some ways, is a controversial figure. He was really wealthy, and a lot of people criticize him for having so much wealth and yet still claiming to be a good Stoic. And one of the quotations from Seneca you'll see speaks to that criticism. But before I get to that, I just want to show you one of Seneca's most famous quotations that really captures the idea behind Stoicism, right? The central teaching behind Stoicism. You start with this felicitas, which is our subject. Doesn't look like it is, but it is. And it's vera felicitas. So this is true happiness. True happiness. Then we go to our main verb, posita est. True happiness has been ponera, posui positus. True happiness has been placed in virtuta, in virtue. So true happiness has been placed in virtue. This captures the Stoic teaching that if you do what is right, if you do what is virtuous, if you do your duty, you will be happy. Another wonderful quotation from from Seneca, that's like the fourth time I did that, from Seneca, is this quotation about wealth. Okay? This is a great quotation because this is Seneca's response to the critics who said, how can you be a good Stoic and be so wealthy? And Seneca says, riches are mine. Okay? In other words, the wealth I have is my wealth. On the other hand, you are, and then the key to understand this quotation is recognizing the case. This is genitive. You are of your riches. Okay? So, the riches are mine. In other words, I own my own wealth. You are of your wealth. All right? I don't want to give you an answer on this. I want you guys to think about this. This is something I will probably ask you about at the beginning of class tomorrow. What does this quotation mean? How is Seneca defending himself as a rich man but still a Stoic? And finally, I like this last quotation from Seneca because it might be Seneca's defense of Nero, if you will. Okay? This is a fantastic quotation. I think there's some truth to it. He says, no great talent. All right, the root of ingenium is gen. All right, this means natural talent, inborn talent. So no great talent was, in other words, no great talent existed, sine mixtura dementiae. No great talent ever existed without a mixture of dementia or madness. No great talent was without a mixture of madness. In other words, all really truly talented people, all people with really impressive talent, are also just a little bit crazy. And of course, this would be a great defense of Nero, huh? And finally, we're going to end with something contemporary. Ooh, I'm curious to see what you guys can do with this. I hope you can make this out. This is a political cartoon from 2012, you see. Rather than this being a picture of Rome burning, you have America burning. You have Nero right here. All right? You have these two people who say, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore. I'm not entirely sure where they're going with that. But here you have Nero playing his fiddle while Rome, or America, is burning. And Nero has written on his toga, partisan politics. What does this cartoon mean? How is the artist of this cartoon using the legend of Nero fiddling while Rome burned to make a political point? That is all I have for you. Valete, Discipuli.